As it appears we do have a quorum, I do call this annual meeting of the Industrial Development Board to order. Moving on to item number 2, public comment period. The Industrial Development Board hosts a designated public comment period at each meeting. Members of the public in attendance may provide comments to the board or its committees during such designated time. Members of the public are allotted 2 minutes for public comment. No advance registration is required. Is there anyone here from the public wishing to speak today? All right, well, you have 2 minutes. Please state your name,
yes, sir.
Please, and thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everyone.
You can sit down.
I can sit down. Hey, everyone. This is Andy Zhu with MFX Ventures. We work on a lot of affordable housing projects around the city. I know y'all have been working on policy, and I missed the ad hoc meeting this morning. Just wanted to get an understanding of if there's like past meetings. I know there's recordings, not to take up your time this morning, but where I should be looking for information on that and if there's policies about it. Thanks, y'all.
Can you say what company you're with again?
With MFX Ventures, MFX. Thank you, everyone.
So thanks, Andy, for your comment. Yes, you can look at the YouTube channel on Metro's website for past meetings. So far, regarding the affordable housing policies, there's only been one presentation. Right now, we're in a data gathering stage where we're looking at sister cities, peer cities, to see what sort of programs they have in place. And then the chair has charged us with kind of looking at what sort of policies do these other cities have that are currently within our authority to enact, so we can kind of present best practices. So in December, I presented on the city of Atlanta, so you can look at that video, and then in upcoming weeks, there will be upcoming months, presentations on Denver, Austin, New Orleans, maybe Charlotte again. There's like 5 or 6 cities. Awesome. So trying to.
Thank you, Board Member Haston. And Andy, thank you for coming today, and we'll certainly talk some housing today as well. So if you stay for the duration of the meeting, you'll hear some information on some of our housing projects that we partnered on and worked on this past year. Thank you for coming. All right, is there anyone else here from the public wishing to speak today? All right, with there being no one else here wishing to speak, we will move to item number 3, approval of prior meeting minutes. These were sent out, but I'll give everyone a moment to review. And if you would be so inclined, you can make a motion to approve the October 9th, 2024 meeting minutes, as well as the December 11th, 2024 meeting minutes. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, if you need to speak, it's the button to the right, and then you'll see the green, and then you can speak.
Okay, so moved on both meeting minutes.
All right, we have a motion by Board Member Channel. Second. All right, thank you, Board Member Davis. Any discussion regarding the minutes? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All right, thank you. Any opposed say nay. All right, motion carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next couple items on the agenda. Part of today, the major focus is, with this being our annual meeting, we want to have some training. Some items are review, but it's good to kind of do those every year. And again, obviously, we have new board members every couple years. So part of the purpose of this, too, is to let everybody know some of the tools and also familiarize everyone with some of our previous projects and tools that we have in our toolbox. With that, based on some questions and items that have come up, I asked Metro Legal to do some training for us, and I will turn it over to you all. Thank you for taking the time to put this training together for us.
Thank you, Chair. And for the viewing public, my name is Josh Thomas, attorney with Metro Legal, and up front is Sam Keene. We've got two presentations for you. Some of you may be familiar with Sam. He's actually new to my team. Previously, we had Lexi Ward, but she has moved on to a different team within our office in Metro Legal. And so Sam Keene has now joined us. And every year we try to do a annual ethics presentation, sort of going over matters related to your ethical obligations as board members, and also talking about some of your obligations related to the Sunshine Laws, which is the Open Meetings Act and the Public Records Act. So Sam is going to start us off and talk about some of those ethics things. And then once he completes his presentation, I'll move on and talk about some things related to the IDB just generally. So Sam, if you'll take it away.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sam. Like Josh mentioned, I'm new to his team. I am taking over for Lexi Ward. There's just been a bit of reshuffling in Metro Legal, as there tends to be sometimes. So I got moved to Josh's team, and I'm happy to be here.
You like our board, though.
I do. I like it. Yes. If I have had the pleasure of meeting you, then hello. And if I have, then hello again. And very glad to be here. Before joining Josh's team, I worked with Metro in our litigation department. For those of you who don't know, Metro Legal is split into two departments: client advice, where we advise clients, and litigation, where we represent Metro in either, affirmative lawsuits, or more often than not, a defensive posture where we've been sued. So I did that for Metro. Before that, I worked with the Tennessee Attorney General's office, doing consumer protection work, mostly focusing on consumer finance related matters. And then before that, I worked at the Legal Aid Society of Middle Tennessee and the Cumberlands, actually with Josh. So before Josh was at Metro, he was at Legal Aid as well. So I've kind of always been in public service. So I certainly know how important ethics are. And as fellow public servants, I'm sure that y'all agree that ethics are important, and not just because we want to behave legally, but because we really care about this job, and we want to make sure that the people that we're helping have faith that we're doing it for the right reasons. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about three types of ethical dilemmas that tend to present themselves, or could present themselves, whenever you are in a role of public service. Those being conflicts of interest, what we call gratuities and kickbacks or bribes, and the need to be transparent with the people that we serve. So the main takeaway today is, as it pertains to conflicts of interest, if you have one, please disclose it and recuse yourself. In terms of gratuities and kickbacks, don't take them. And transparency, the more the better. So I think that's all stuff that we believe in, but we're gonna go over these concepts in a little bit more detail. So, like I mentioned, any time that you may have a conflict of interest, or have a bias, especially an economic one, it's good to first and foremost disclose it to your fellow board members in a public setting, and then recuse yourself. So this is kind of what the definition of conflict of interest is. I think we all have an idea of what that means. Basically, it's whenever you have an interest that might keep you from being impartial. There are some laws that discuss conflicts of interest. There are here. The first law, PCA 753-301, that actually relates to the IDB specifically. And you all have to fill out a form each year where you make certain disclosures, and you also confirm that you're familiar with the ethical rules of being an IDB member and the need to disclose conflicts and recuse yourself when necessary. There are two types of conflicts of interest that we're going to talk about, direct and indirect. Again, both of those are codified. TCA 12.4.101, that's a statute that applies to every person that serves on a public body for a municipality. And then 102 kind of discusses penalties for whenever you don't disclose and recuse. Basically, if you don't disclose and recuse and you benefit economically from a decision that the public body has made, you're going to have to give that money back and then potentially be barred from serving on a public body for, I think, a couple of years, if I recall correctly.
You're right.
So a conflict of interest really means any type of situation that can create what we call the appearance of impropriety. That just means, is your relationship or your involvement with the debate, discussion, decision, vote at issue, would it cause somebody to believe that maybe this person can't make an unbiased, impartial decision? You know, would it even if you could, even if you say I could, would somebody, not you, looking at the situation say, I'm not so sure you can. Maybe I wouldn't be able to if I was in the same position. Anytime that situation occurs, there's an appearance of impropriety and then by definition, a conflict of interest. So, like I mentioned, there are two types: direct conflict of interest and indirect conflict of interest. A direct conflict of interest is a situation where there is definitely an appearance of impropriety. That's not up for debate. This is a situation that creates an appearance of impropriety and will require you to disclose the conflict and recuse yourself from the discussion, debate, vote, whatever it is at issue. Here are just a couple examples of direct conflicts of interest. If there is a vote before the board about awarding a contract, and one of the people that might be awarded the contract is a family member, that should be disclosed, and you should recuse yourself. That is a direct conflict of interest.
What if you don't like that family member?
Even if, yeah.
No,
Yes.
that's true.
Right, exactly, because then you're going to vote against them, and they'll get mad about that. Obviously, recommending your own business for a project. Now, that might, if let's say you own a business, and it's the sole provider of the goods or services that are trying to be procured in the immediate area, and it makes sense for that business to be awarded the contract, that's fine. You still need to disclose that and probably recuse yourself from the vote. Obviously, if it's the sole business that provides the good or service in the immediate area, you're probably going to win the contract, right? So there's no point in you being involved in the discussion and participating in the vote. Yes, sir.
What about, totally understand on direct projects that come before the board, we would need to disclose and recuse. What if we're talking about policies or programs in general that board members may eventually take part in? Do we need to disclose that as well?
Absolutely. And that might fall more within the category of indirect conflict of interest, because you don't stand to materially gain immediately, right, from this particular decision at issue. You personally don't stand to materially gain from that. But down the line, maybe, directly or indirectly, your business might be affected one way or the other. If you think that's a possibility, if you have thought in your head, hey, this might be a situation where it might affect me economically, whether for the good or bad, disclose it, right? Always disclose. And then certainly, if you're unsure, that probably means you should disclose. And at the very least, it means you should talk to Josh and I about it.
And if I just can add to that, and Sam sort of mentioned this, it's really about the issue of public perception. So even if perhaps the law does not necessarily require you to recuse, which in the case of direct conflict you have to, even if there's an indirect conflict, even if you think it might be remote, it is always recommended that you probably disclose it. And Sam, to get to this, if you can say that you can be impartial in making your decision, you need to state that on the record. But at the end of the day, you want the public to feel like that you're acting in the best interests of the body and for the public, and you don't want the perception to reflect negatively on you or the board. And so that's why it's important to disclose those type of things.
Hey, Josh, you just said something kind of related to a question I was about to ask Sam. You said earlier disclose publicly. Can you remind us what that looks like?
If there's a debate or a discussion or an agenda item, at a public meeting, I mean, really, board business should only be discussed in, detail at a public meeting. So there's a public meeting, the public has been notified, they're aware. There's an agenda item on the meeting that you think you might have a conflict of interest. On the record, you need to say, hey, everybody, I think I have a conflict of interest here. I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion. Y'all go ahead without me.
Question on the heavily invested in. Is that a percentage amount?
Not.
Because it's kind of vague to say heavily. I mean, you could own less than 5% of a corporation, or you could own 30 or 40 or 50 or 80%. So heavily is...
Right. I think I would consider it something more than tangential, and that you might have, obviously, we all probably own stock in some form or fashion, right? But if you're going to shareholders meetings and, participating in important decisions, or if you're one of only a handful of partners, that's probably something that needs to be discussed further. I think if you think it might be an issue, then the point is, it's just let's talk about it and let's see if it's something that needs to be resolved before the public meeting.
Okay. Thanks.
So I want to clarify one thing you just mentioned. You said we need to recuse ourselves from discussion. Do you truly mean discussion, or do you mean the vote? Because I feel like sometimes when we're talking about new policies and programs, some board members may be highly qualified to add to the discussion, and that doesn't necessarily make that, in my opinion, a bad thing. I understand needing to recuse from the vote, but it's like an expert witness in many ways.
Yes. My understanding is that you should not participate in the discussion.
And to clarify, this is for, you're talking about direct conflicts. Direct conflicts.
Correct. Because even if your participation in the discussion, you're giving, at the end of the day, you're giving an opinion on something, right? Even if it's your expert opinion because you're familiar with the industry or whatever it is, if it can be perceived that what you're suggesting to the board could sway the board in any particular direction, that's not a good thing. So my professional opinion is, if you have a direct conflict of interest, you just need to stay out of it altogether.
Even when it comes to definition, someone asks you, well, you specialize in this particular thing and you have a really good understanding, someone from the board asks, could you expound on that? Give us a definition of what that means. You can't even respond in that manner.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be probably a situation that's okay.
Okay.
But you gotta be real careful not to give the impression that you are offering an opinion one way or the other.
Right. So just don't add an opinion to it. Just go ahead and state the fact or something. Yeah.
It's hard to do a bright line rule on this type of stuff, but let me just say, if you're not going to be voting, whether or not it's a direct or indirect conflict, if you're not going to be voting on it and you're recusing yourself, you should not be participating at all in any of the discussion or debate.
When you say any discussion or debate, are you talking about discussion and debate on action we're about to take?
Correct. So if there's been a motion and there's been a second, and then the chair has opened the floor for discussion related to that motion, if you're not going to be voting, you do not need to be participating in that discussion.
Can I give a real life example? So right now we have a special committee where we're looking at peer cities policies on affordable housing.
Okay.
Right? And in a lot of ways, I'm heavily relying on some of the board members who are experts in affordable housing Because our ultimate goal is that committee wants to make a recommendation to the full board on some policies that we should put in place. Is it okay for that expert to provide, what they found on peer CDs versus what Nashville is doing?
I think that's fine. I mean,
need that
based
from them.
on that particular fact circumstance, I don't think there's anything there where you're basically just presenting information to each other. You're not really voting on a specific project or development or something like that. So I don't really see that as an issue.
Okay, good.
I think when we're talking about things where, the board is, voting to issue bonds or approving a project.
Like it's only a hard thing on the agenda that we're voting on.
Correct. That's where we get into where you need to recuse, and if there is going to be discussion about it, if you're recusing yourself, you should not be participating in the conversation about that.
Okay, great. And then follow up from my earlier question about public disclosure. So it's not sufficient if we do have a vote involving like a bond or a TIF or whatever the action may be. It's not sufficient for us to just tell Jamari once we get the agenda or talk to Josh or you beforehand. We need to say something at the public meeting while we're not participating and while we're not voting.
Right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Okay. Think of it sort of as a two-step process. Is the issue on the agenda something where a decision is pending or could be pending down the line? And if so, do you stand to gain materially from the outcome of that decision? If that's the case, there is a conflict of interest by definition. If you don't stand to gain materially, then there's not, right? So even if, you have some interest in affordable housing outside of the board, unless you own a company that is seeking, bonds or whatever it is, unless you are, financially invested or own or whatever, or receive a salary from, consulting fees from that, then it's probably okay. So we thought direct conflicts of interest were a little vague.
I know. That's quick.
Indirect conflicts present even more of a gray area. Because really we're talking about a situation where even though you don't stand to gain economically, personally from it, or a close family member or friend, would somebody from a third party perspective, the outside perspective, be like, I still don't think that person can act with full impartiality on the decision at issue, on the debate that's being debated. But again, indirect conflicts of interest don't necessarily create the appearance of impropriety. But if a situation, occurs where we think an indirect conflict of interest exists, we should probably have a conversation about whether the appearance of impropriety exists. Just here are some examples. That could constitute an indirect conflict of interest. Again, like having regulatory oversight over a former employer. Well, you're not receiving a salary from that party, right? You don't have any investments in that former employer, but maybe you're biased against that former employer because you didn't like something that they did whenever you worked for them. You should probably disclose that and recuse it, even if you're not, right? Disclose that, and unless you can assure your fellow board members and the public that you can act with full impartiality, you should probably recuse yourself. Even if that's true for you, right? If an outside observer looking at the situation thinks, I'm not so sure that's true, then it's still probably best to err on the side of caution and recuse yourself. So here's some examples of when you should recuse yourself, and whenever you might not need to recuse yourself. The biggest one, whenever you don't have to recuse yourself, you can be objective and do not believe your participation will create an appearance of impropriety. In that case, you still disclose the potential conflict of interest, but you state on the record that you believe that you will be able to participate in the discussion, the debate, or the vote with full impartiality and without bias. So again, the takeaway is you have a duty of independence. We have a duty to the public to assure them that business is being conducted without self-interest. And, you know, part of doing that means, you know, making sure that we vocalize that we're actually behaving that way, right? And again, the point is, if you have any concerns at all about whether conflict of interest exists, just come talk to us. All right, so the next, gratuities and kickbacks. I don't know how much time we need to spend on this. So every single mayor, one of the first things that they do whenever they come to the office, they issue, you know, boilerplate executive orders. This executive order has been issued by, I think, like the last 8 mayors or something. But anyway, it's basically an executive order that applies to all Metro employees that just clearly states these are things you cannot do as a Metro employee. Can't use your office for public gain. Can't give preferential treatment. You know, don't slow things down just for the sake of it. Don't lose your independence, and make all, you know, decisions made by this board need to be during, you know, business hours, basically, right? You know, the biggest thing is we don't want to adversely affect the confidence that the public has in the work that we do. So part of this means we don't take gifts. We don't accept gifts or, you know, some people call them gratuities, kickbacks, whatever it is, bribes, right, from third parties in exchange for the services that we provide the public. It goes without saying, right? But again, it could be a little bit more complicated than that, because there might be situations where, just as a matter of course, we're given something or we're interacting with somebody where it makes sense to disclose our position, not necessarily to gain favor, but to let them know this is something that we do, and that we have a thought on this, and that this is something that might be brought up at a public meeting later. So, you know, use your best judgment, right? There are some specific scenarios in terms of limitations on what you can and can't receive in exchange for the work that you do as a public servant. We'll talk about those, but the main takeaway is don't take anything for the work that you do, and don't actively seek any type of benefit. With, you know, you get pulled over, officer. Well, I serve as a member of the Industrial Development Board. And,
do you know who I am?
yeah, do you know who I am? Yeah. Those are the, I mean, have you ever seen the body cam footage of someone who thinks that their position as a public servant should give them some type of favorable treatment from a police officer? That's a good way to not only lose your role as a public servant, but to lose your reputation in general, and we don't want that to happen. So you get pulled over, you say, you know, good morning, officer. You know, what can I do for you? You take your ticket and you go on your day. You don't say, do you know who I am? Talk should never, ever, ever happen. So again, this is just the so Mayor O'Connell has the executive order. This is the part of the Metro Code that specifically states limited exceptions. This is important. So if it's something like a plaque or something that you get for being, you know, part of the Lions Club, right? That's fine. Sometimes meals, you know, but there's a $25 limit, so be careful not to do that. You know, if you have to go to a charity event and the admission is, you know, somewhere between $0 and $100 to get in, if you get in because you need to be there as part of your role as a public servant, that's perfectly fine. Okay.
If I could just jump here real quick, Sam. So, and I'll talk a little bit about this during my presentation. So Metro's ethics rules that apply to Metro employees technically does not apply to this board because this board is not a Metro board. You're created under state law. However, it is our recommendation that is very much best practices. So we would strongly encourage you to follow those rules. But I feel like I'm obligated to tell you of that distinction. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that.
This is a rule that does definitely apply. These are what are called Tennessee Sunshine Laws, the Public Records Act and the Open Meetings Act. Public Records Act means any document, piece of writing, an email sent back and forth between board members, all of that stuff is public record and is subject to disclosure. If somebody makes a request, you know, I want every email sent between board member A and board member B, they're going to get that. Or, you know, I want all the documents that, you know, are associated with the contract that was awarded to, you know, whatever. Those are things that the public is entitled to have and to review. And if they make a public records request for those documents, Josh and I are going to review it, and we're going to pull everything that might contain those documents, and we're going to review those for what we call responsive documents, and we're going to provide those to the public.
And we say this at every training. I mean, obviously, you guys are not Metro employees, so you don't have Metro emails, Metro phones, but you are still considered subject to this act. And so we will come to you and ask for you to provide us with your emails, with your text messages, whatever you have that you may think is private, but technically it is public. So just keep that in mind when you're using your personal devices. Just because it's personal doesn't mean that the public doesn't have a right to access it if it is, in fact, a public record under this act. So just want to make sure you're aware of that.
I do make this suggestion, and I think it's a perfectly legitimate suggestion. You know, I have a personal email, sdkeen@gmail.com. That's my personal email. I don't conduct any government business on my personal email because I'm fortunate that, you know, I have a Metro email address. So anything that I do related to my job is done with that email address. I think it's perfectly okay for you to make an email, you know, jimsmith.idb@gmail.com, and make sure that to the extent you're using an email to discuss anything or you know, receive anything from the IDB, that's the email that it's going to. That way, whenever someone does make a public records request, you know, Josh and I don't have to go through your entire private email box. We just go through the one that you've created for your role as a public service. Josh, I don't know if is that something that you agree with?
Yeah, you can definitely create a separate email address if you want to try to segregate those and keep it separate. I mean, just the bottom line is that it doesn't matter what you use. If you're doing IDB business over email or your personal phone, if we get a records request and you have responsive information on either of those devices, we're going to have to ask you to provide it to us.
Well, if it's not your personal phone, but a corporate phone, would that still same purview? Or?
It's the same. I mean, it obviously gets a little dicey when you're dealing with corporate entities, but, you know, I think if there was a lawsuit and we got sued, I can certainly see a judge ordering us to require you to turn over that device or require your business to turn over that device if there's public records on that device.
Okay.
There's the Public Records Act, Open Meetings Act. All our meetings have to be accessible to the public, and of course, there was this amendment recently that in 2023 that requires public meetings to include a period for public comment, like we had this morning. So we do that before every meeting. Just some best practices. You know, avoid the use of email or text to discuss board issues. To discuss board issues, I guess, is different than somebody emailing you, we're going to review this document, you know, whatever it is. You know, just be careful. Provide an agenda, do the public comment period. And then, again, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, I think the open records stuff and the, you know, gratuities and kickback stuff is pretty straightforward. Conflicts of interest stuff can be a little vague and up for debate sometimes. So, especially if you have any questions about that, please come to Josh and I. Give us a call, shoot us an email. We will happily take as much time as we need to discuss and resolve the issue. So that's all.
Thank you. Whatever. That's fine. That's it.
Thank you. All right, well, now to the second presentation. This is going to be more general about sort of the IDB's powers and some things related to how you run your meetings generally. In the interest of time, I may go a little fast. So if you do have some questions afterwards, I'm more than happy to stick around and answer those. Also, in front of you, I have printed out a very thick packet of some laws under the Industrial Development Corporation Act. Those are the state laws that actually allows for the creation of the IDB, also talks about your powers and some of the things that you're able to do. It's obviously in a lot of legalese, but I thought it was good for you to have that. And, you know, if you want to read it before you go to bed at night to put you to sleep, you've got it. So, all right, so moving along here. So the Industrial Development Board. So as I mentioned, you're authorized under state law under Title 7, Chapter 53 of the Tennessee Code. This board actually was first created in 1959, and at the time it was the Industrial Development Board for the city of Nashville. As you know, Metro was created. Technically, it was approved in 62, but 1963 is when the consolidation actually happened. And so when that happened, this board officially became the IDB of Nashville and Metro government. You are a quasi-governmental entity. So this board is actually a public nonprofit corporation. I don't know if you're aware, but if any of you serve on any other nonprofit boards, or even if you work for a for-profit corporation that has a board of directors, there are annual filings that have to be filed with the Secretary of State that basically lists all the board members. And that is something that this board has to do as a public nonprofit corporation. All that happens in the background, you've got the administrative staff that's handling that. But I just mentioned that so you sort of understand the delineation that you're not necessarily the same as Metro, which is a municipal corporation. You are a nonprofit corporation, so you are a completely separate entity. Moving on. So the IDB is separate from Metro, and actually for a number of years, decades, this board sort of operated independently of Metro. I want to say back in, it may have been 2008, 2012, don't exactly remember when the year was, but there was a decision made for there to be an interlocal agreement entered in between IDB and Metro, where basically Metro is providing the administrative, financial, and legal support to the board. So the last time that interlocal agreement was approved by this board and by Metro Council was back in 2022. Those agreements are for 5-year periods, and so the current agreement will expire in June 30th of 2027. And in the agreement, just so you're aware of it, at any time, either Metro or this board can terminate that agreement with 90 days notice. But under the interlocal agreement, Jamari Brown, as the ECD director, serves as the IDB's executive director. Metro Finance is your fiscal agent, handling all fiscal matters related to the board, also doing some reporting that's required by the state, including the comptroller's office. Metro Legal serves as your general counsel. And also note here that while we work closely with your bond counsel, which is corporate law firm, we at Metro Legal actually do not supervise them. The contract is not with them, it's actually with you as the board. So you are the ones that technically oversee them, not us.
And I would say that contract was also the same, I think that was the same year as well.
I think that's correct, or around the same time.
Which was approved by the board after we interviewed several companies. And you were on the steering committee with me as we interviewed companies, but ultimately it was a board decision to vote on the Carpenters as our issuers counsel. And similar to, there's an early termination clause in that agreement as well.
Correct, and I may look to them. It's also a 5-year agreement, I believe.
Could we get a copy, Josh, of the interlocal agreement just to review?
It's on the website.
It's on the website, but I'll be happy to send it to you as well. Yeah.
No worries, I can look that up. Appreciate it.
All right, so I'm going to speed through this, but I wanted to sort of familiarize you with the statutory purposes of the IDBs, and this is generally for industrial development corporations, and this is straight out of the statute. And so it says, one of your goals is to maintain and increase employment opportunities, increase the production of agricultural commodities, increase the quantity of housing that's available in your communities. And those three things are to be accomplished, and this is, again, straight out of the statute, through the promotion of industry, trade, commerce, tourism, and recreation, agriculture, and housing construction by inducing manufacturing, industrial, governmental, educational, financial, service, commercial, and everything else it says there. Also interesting in the statute, it says one of your purposes is to promote and control the elimination of all types of pollution. I don't know how much work we've done in that in the past, but it is also one of the purposes of IDBs. So the
Can you
overall,
go back one slide real quick?
Sure.
I know we have it. I just want to see that. Okay, got you.
And so in the packet that I provide to you, you'll look at the, I think what's probably on the first couple of pages, it talks about what your purposes are. And it lists all these things, and it's in much more detail than what I have up here. So if you're interested in just seeing that. All right, so the general goal of IDBs is really to promote economic development. And through that, the statute gives you certain powers to do certain things. So you are authorized to acquire projects, and projects actually has a specific definition. If you also look in the statutes, there's a definition section that talks about what are projects and what are eligible projects that the board is able to do. So you don't have powers to do everything. There are some limitations, but I put a couple of examples here from the statute of eligible projects that you can do, and those are manufacturing facilities, office buildings, public buildings, healthcare facilities, interestingly, amusement parks and tourism-related facilities, pollution control, multifamily income housing, and nonprofit educational institutions, thinking classroom, labs, housing for those nonprofit institutions, physical education, and medical research.
Question, Josh.
Yes, sir.
Just a point of clarification, the legislation that I referenced in the ad hoc committee, it proposed legislation, I should say, it potentially broadened some definitions as it relates to projects and eligible projects. So
Okay.
just might be helpful to review if that passes.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, again, going through some of your statutory powers, you are authorized to sell, exchange, convey, or donate any of all of your property that are consistent with your statutory purposes. So I know during the ad hoc committee, the chair mentioned a grant program that you're trying to do. Through this provision in the statute, that will allow you to do grants because you're basically conveying or donating funds that belong to the IDB. The carpenter is going to talk a little bit more about your authority to issue bonds and borrow money related to debt. And then you also have the power to do pilot agreements and TIF agreements, which I think is what Board Member Haston was also referring to earlier in the ad hoc committee. I'm going to go quickly through pilots and TIFs. I just kind of want to give you a brief overview of what pilots are. I don't think any member of this board other than perhaps the chair was involved in a pilot agreement, or board member
Davis, I think, was as well.
All right.
I think he was on the board because WeGo was the last one.
Okay.
Ernest Rip Patton Transit Center.
Okay.
So I think.
So again, just a general overview over what pilots are. So just as background, so under the Tennessee Constitution, there's a general requirement that all property is subject to taxation unless it's exempt under state law. And so cities and counties governments themselves, so metro government, does not have the ability to directly grant an exemption from taxation unless it's permitted under law. And so the way to get around that is through what's called a pilot, which is a payment in lieu of tax agreement. And the way that works is the property is transferred to the IDB, and under state law, property that is owned by the IDB is actually exempt from taxation. And so the project is transferred to the board. The board then leases the project back to the developer. The developer operates the project for whatever the purposes were for the incentive. and then the developer will pay a pilot amount in exchange for not having to pay ad valorem tax. And usually the way pilot agreements are structured is usually they pay a percentage of the tax that they would have paid if the property was in fact subject to taxation. So that's just a brief overview of that. Any questions about pilots?
Quick question. I've worked with pilots typically through the Health and Ed Board and our other business that I'm affiliated with. So in that instance, we're not able, the Health and Ed Board and MDHA are not able to abate more than what the property is currently creating if it's a greenfield development. And I want to make sure that same rule applies here. And then secondly, what happens to that spread? So if the property is creating $20,000 of property taxes currently, as improved, it may create $200,000, but we decide the pilot payment is $100,000. So what happens to that spread of the 100, or I guess in that sense, $80,000? So $20,000 goes back to Metro. $80,000, does that come to us? Where does that go?
So I guess let me answer your question a couple different ways. So pilot payments are actually made as if they're just regular tax payments, so they go into the general fund of Metro. So the limitations that you're mentioning about the Health and Ed boards and MDHA pilots do not apply to IDB, so there is an ability to abate the amount almost 100%. Usually the way the IDB pilots have been structured is, as I mentioned earlier, is that it is a percentage of the tax that would have been paid. And so the assessor of property will appraise the property and come up with value like any other property that's on the tax rolls. That value is given then to finance, who basically does the billing for pilots. And so let's say if the assessor determines that the property is worth, I'm just going to use easy numbers for me, it's $100,000. It's a commercial property, so the assessment value would be $40,000. Let's just say the tax rate is 10%, so the tax is $4,000, and the abatement is 50%. That's $2,000 that would just go to Metro, but the rest of the money has been abated, so the property owner doesn't have to pay that.
All right.
Is that answering your question?
Well, so you answered how much is abated, but let's just say, let's go back to that same example. Let's just say we decided the payment in lieu of was greater. Like if the whole property was supposed to pay $4,000 in taxes, we abated 50% of it, but there's a payment in lieu of that is the consideration given, if you will. In that instance, if let's just say the consideration was 25%, does that mean that we get 1,000 of that 4,000?
I may not be following your question, but there's no, in a pilot arrangement, there's no money coming to the IDB.
Yeah.
So basically they're making a lesser tax payment, basically is what they're doing. And that money's still going to Metro just as any other tax payment would be. So it goes into Metro's general fund just as anything else. But there's no money coming to the IDB through pilot agreements. Okay. And the last thing I mentioned is that generally pilots do require Metro Council approval in addition to the IDB. There is a little funky limitation that talks about tax credit properties, which are really referring to LITEX, but that requires Metro Council to delegate some authority to the IDB to be able to do those without requiring them to come to Council. But for the most part, they have to be approved by Metro Council. TIFs, I'll go through very quickly. TIFs are another economic incentive tool. It allows developers to be reimbursed for certain eligible costs related to a development or project. And generally the way that works is that before a TIF is approved, there's a base amount of tax that the taxpayer has been paying in. The idea is that once the property is developed, it's going to be generating additional property taxes. The difference between what the tax payment was before the TIF was approved, and then the amount of money that's coming afterwards is called the increment. And so the IDB has the ability, and this also requires Metro Council approval, to do TIF deals where essentially that increment, the money from that can be pledged to basically pay back the developer for reimbursing certain eligible costs. And usually we're talking about public infrastructure costs what's being reimbursed. And so I think the last TIF deal that this board did was maybe 2 years ago, and that was the Madison Station / Madison Square deal. So you guys may be familiar with that.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So in that instance where you referred to Madison Station, that project, the individual developer came to the board and requested a TIF. Is it within our governing statutes as the IDB to create our own TIF districts, specifically if it went beyond one parcel? Like, so could we, within our abilities, could we say we wanted to create a TIF district around XYZ corridor, all our parcels that are a quarter mile away from this corridor, we could slap a TIF district on it, and then that would potentially incentivize other developers to do projects within said TIF district?
The short answer is no.
Because you need council approval for that as well, correct?
You need council approval. So with TIF deals that come through the IDB, what's required first is what's called an economic impact plan. And that has to be approved by both this board and also Metro Council. And really the purpose of the economic impact plan is to show how the development is going to benefit the area, how it's going to increase economic development in the area. And so, yeah, that would require council approval. So the IDB cannot act alone on TIF.
Question. Oh, go ahead.
That's what I figured. I just wanted to ask the dumb question.
No dumb
Go
questions.
ahead, board member Wright.
Kind of following up on that, what if you had an inspired redevelopment district through MDHA, and let's say it's out of its period, and you have a developer come along that wants to do another project in that particular area? Can we as a board, I guess, start another redevelopment district there or extend what MDHA has put in place?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, MDHA, I think this may be implied in your question. MDHA has the ability to do TIF districts themselves.
Right.
And so it seems to me they may just go back to MDHA if I'm understanding your question.
Yeah, I was thinking if it's already, say it's 30 years and the time has expired, can you actually do it again on that particular area? That might be an MDHA question or...
Yeah, I actually don't know the answer to that. My thought is probably no, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just one item I would say to that too is on the TIF deal. We've done a couple in my tenure on the board. There's also some state legislation around the term on that TIF as well. So if it goes beyond a certain period, then that can require state approval as well.
Yeah, and I'll mention actually for both pilots and TIFs, I don't quote me on this, but I want to say if it's going to be over 20 years,
That's right.
I think there's requirement to get state permission or approval to do those for any period longer than that. All right, board governance. So I'll try to breeze through this quickly in the interest of time. But in terms of sort of the laws that apply to you in terms of how you run your board meetings and what you can do, there are state law, the IDB statutes, which I provided to you. There are state laws that are just generally applicable to governmental entities that also apply. And then there are, in some cases, some state laws applicable to nonprofit corporations that may govern what you can do. Also, your board's charter and bylaws give some guidance on what you can do in Robert's Rules of Order. Director Brown sent to you, I want to say maybe a couple weeks ago, a legal manual handbook that the Department of Law has created for all boards and commissions of Metro that gives a really good overview of sort of some of the laws, duties, and responsibility to you as board members. As I mentioned earlier, you are not technically a Metro board. However, there are a lot of good things in that manual that do apply to you. And I'm going to try to sort of go through these very quickly, but I pulled out some of the stuff that I think you probably should be aware of and would be applicable to you. So the first thing I want to mention is about the duty to vote. So under state law, it is generally that every board member who has an opinion on a matter has a duty to vote. I mean, obviously, if you have a conflict, you don't need to vote. But otherwise, it's the expectation that you will vote. And Tennessee law disfavors abstentions because they are essentially a vote for the prevailing side. and they're being purposely kept out of the public record. So unless you have a true conflict, law generally wants you to vote on matters that come before you. You've obviously been elected by council to sit on this board because you have certain expertise or interest in what this board does. And the expectation is that you're going to bring that to decisions that this board has to make. And so the expectation is that you will be voting on matters that come before you. Confidential information. So a couple of things on this. First is, and I don't think this board has had to do an executive session recently or in recent memory, but an executive session happens, and this is something that can happen outside of the public, so basically behind closed doors, and that can only occur when there is ongoing litigation or the threat of litigation. Metro Legal has the ability to meet with you, or whoever your lawyer is, to meet with you and discuss that behind closed doors and talk about matters related to that. However, if there's any votes that's going to be happening related to that conversation, that has to happen out in the public. But the important thing for you to remember is that if we do go into executive session and there is confidential information that is provided, you are not to share that information or the confidential legal advice that's been provided to you by your lawyer. Another thing related to confidential information is there are several state laws that require information that you may receive to remain confidential for a certain period of time. And so I've listed some of the three major ones here, but if you're voting on a big project, there may be some background information that's provided to you in advance of that. Well, some of that information may not be subject to disclosure under the Public Records Act, and you are required to keep that confidential. And some of the big things are companies' trade secrets, proprietary info. Under state law, that always remains confidential. If there were some marketing materials that the company provided, that remains confidential basically until the company says that it's not. And then if there are agreements or contracts that you're actually voting to approve, under state law, those are required to stay confidential until they're actually provided to the board in advance of an actual vote. So I guess the important thing to keep in mind is that you may have someone that reaches out to you, let's say from the press, asking for copies of documents. You probably need to reach out to us before you start sending stuff. And I really think a good practice probably would be, if you do receive those type of requests, is really to forward those to Director Brown and let him handle those, because we can get into some real pickles here if you start releasing information that you're not authorized to release.
Yes, and that does happen.
Yeah.
At least I've received some requests personally, and that's what I do.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
All your meetings are governed by Robert Rules of Order. I'll go through these quickly. Obviously, there needs to be a quorum. All members have equal have votes. I think we all know about how to do a motion in a second, so I'll skip through that. Member who makes the motion is entitled to speak first. A member technically needs to be recognized before they start speaking. Only one member is supposed to talk at a time. The general rule is that no member should speak twice on something until everyone else has been heard. You're supposed to confine your discussion to the pending question or the pending motion that's in front of you. I think a lot of this is just general decorum, but members may not attack another member's motives. Personal remarks or side discussions are not appropriate. If you need clarification on something, you can ask for a point of parliamentary inquiry. We can be informal, but, this is a technical rule under Robert Rules of Order. If there is debate going on and you think it's time to close it down, you have the option to basically do what's called call the question. And essentially there's a motion for that in a second. And then if there's a 2/3 approval by the body, then discussion ends, and then you proceed to the vote. This talks about the role of the chair. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just breeze through that. Meeting minutes. Again, this is all in the legal manual that was provided to you by Director Brown. So meeting minutes. Minutes are considered to be a record of what was done at the meeting, not a record was said. So at a minimum, it just needs to reflect who made the motion, who seconded the motion, what procedural actions were taken, and who voted and how. It should capture the exact wording of the motions. It should list the board members who were there. But the important thing is that minutes are not intended to be a record of everything that was said by everyone at the meeting, because obviously that would make them very long. And so the general thought is that if there is a question about sort of specific comments or statements that were made, you refer to the video recording or the audio recording of the meeting. And that concludes the presentation. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take any, but also feel free to reach out at any time to me or Sam if you have questions.
Thank you, Metro Legal Team, for that really great discussion and some fantastic questions from the board, which is why we did this today. Any questions here to my right? All right, over here to my left. All right, thank you all again for such a wonderful presentation. Very excellent, and some wonderful and insightful questions from the board. All right, moving on to item number 5. Officer election. So with this being our annual meeting, we do this every year. And again, 4 positions: officers, chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, assistant secretary, and treasurer. So first I want to thank, obviously our vice chair who's not here today, but certainly want to thank our secretary and treasurer, board member Davis, and then our assistant secretary and treasurer, board member Haston as well. And I want to say it was Thanksgiving week. Board member Davis and I had to sign some documents. Anyway, so I really appreciate that, because sometimes stuff comes up with our deals that are old, go way back, just like we own properties, because for these pilots, as the IDB and when the pilot ends, that property's got to get deeded back. So a lot of times there's stuff that always comes up that can come up that has to be signed. And Board Member Haston, you've also signed some documents as well when Board Member Davis was not available. So thank you for doing that. All right. With that, this board has made the approval to do nominations by the floor at last year's meeting. So we'll start off with, and we'll just go in order. Should I do nominations? Chair, just go down. Okay, so I'll take nominations for chair first and go down the line. I'd
like to nominate Chairman Nigel Hodge again for chair.
Second.
All right, thank you both. Are there any other nominations for chair? All right, seeing as there are no other nominations for chair, all those in favor of Nigel Hodge as chair, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
Nay. Nay.
All right, thank you. Motion carried. All right, moving on to nominations next for vice chair. Any nominations for vice chair?
I nominate Board Member Haston.
All right, we have a second. All right, thank you. Any other nominations for vice chair? All right. So we have motion properly second. All those in favor of Board Member Haston as vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, motion carried. Thank you. All right. Next, nominations for secretary treasurer.
I nominate Board Member Channel.
All right, we have a nomination for board member Channel. Let's go.
Can I decline?
You can.
I decline the nomination.
All right. Sorry, board member Rodriguez. All right, any other nominations for secretary?
I nominate Anthony Davis.
All right, we have a
Happy to serve again if nobody else wants to.
Any other nominations for secretary? All right. Do we have a second for Board Member Davis?
Second.
All right. Thank you, Board Vice Chair. Thank you. All those in, so we have proper second. All those in favor of Anthony Davis continuing to serve as Secretary and Treasurer, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. All right, motion carried. Thank you. All right, next, Assistant Secretary Treasurer, and again, this position would fill in, have the ability to sign documents as well in case the Secretary Treasurer was out. So we do need a new Assistant Secretary Treasurer.
Nominate Charlie Rodriguez.
I'll second it.
Hold on. Do you want to say something?
I accept.
Okay. All right. So this was, who made the first motion? Oh, shoot. Thank you. Board Member Wright, properly second. Any other nominations for Assistant Secretary / Treasurer? Oh, all right. All those in favor of Board Member Rodriguez as Assistant Secretary and / Treasurer, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right. Thank you, Board Member Rodriguez. Thank you for serving. Motion carried. So thank you to the new officers for your willingness to serve. All right. Moving on to item number 6, bond financing overview. We have the both Charles and Corbin Carpenter here, so we'll give them a minute to set up, and we'll move on to item number 6 on the agenda.
Yes, sir. That's good. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see your faces as always. I am Corbin Carpenter. This is Charles Carpenter. We have the pleasure of serving as your issuer bond counsel for the Industrial Development Board. As we worked with Sam and Josh, they took care of the meat of this presentation, so we do want to have a more interactive conversation with the board about your history of bonds. So we're going to start with a recap of the year. So if the board is so reminded that this year we redid completely the bond application and the bond policies and procedures, and I know the gentleman from MFX Ventures, the bond application and policies and procedures are actually available on the IDB's website. They will answer most of your questions. If not, you can reach out to Director Brown for further questions, and he'll reach out to us if additional information is needed. The board closed 3 bond issuances this past year, one with Cumberland Heights, which is the most prolific actually drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers in the state of Tennessee. So that was phenomenal. I know there was a ribbon cutting ceremony that Chair Hodge attended, and we hope to have more ribbon cutting ceremonies for the IDB board members to attend in the future for the great work that you do. The second 2 were supplemental bond issuances from Dominium. There were 2 affordable housing projects, and as you know, Dominium has applied and had got 2 bond applications and inducements induced this past month. Yeah, well, yep. In December, for 2 new bond issuances for acquisition and rehabilitation for 2 affordable housing sites here in Metro Nashville. And as Josh and Sam stated in their presentation, I know that the focus of the board has been affordable housing. The board may be presented with new applications coming forward this year that may be away and separate and apart from housing. That is within the purview of the board to approve said applications. For example, last year we know that an application came for Tennessee State University for certain affordable housing endeavors for that project, which did not work out, unfortunately. And just to let the board know that happens. Everything that gets approved and induced by this board does not close for various reasons. And, that project or similar projects may return to the board in the future. going on a quick recap of the authority, as Josh gave a intricate presentation, so won't really hit that. But your authority does come from the Tennessee State Code annotated Title 7, Chapter 53, that lays out all the board's duties, responsibilities, and gives a update, not an update, but just a disclosure of the parameters of the board's powers. So what we will hit is a few points that, Josh and Sam did not hit. And just to remind the board, to properly discharge your duties, specifically, when approving and conducting your diligence for bond inducements and applications. So, got it. So as far as the first thing with the diligence, so when an application is submitted to the board, and with the new application that the board formulated, the application fee was increased because the amount of information that needs to be submitted to the board to conduct our necessary diligence has greatly increased as well too from the applicant. So we get applications that may range 1,000+ pages that we want to review and do our diligence with our law firm, with Metro Legal, and also the Office of Economic and Community Development, that we are able to present the board confidently with a viable application that you can then consider and vote on. And with the approval process, as you know, they come to the board, give an overview of their whole application and project. Then the board has their consideration to approve or deny the initial inducement. And the inducement resolution, to remind the board, just sets the parameters for the bond transaction. So the not to exceed amount, par amount for the bonds, the project site, a general description of what the project will entail, the borrower that will receive the bond funds from the IDB, and the anticipated date for closing, a few the not to exceed interest rate and things of that sort. And with that approval of the inducement, most importantly in the inducement, it authorizes our firm to conduct a public TEFR hearing. And that TEFR hearing stands for the Tax Equity Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982, which is required under the Internal Revenue Code to have a public hearing, discuss the site of the project with the community, give the community a chance to come and give, their support or opposition for the project, and make sure that that is conducted within the parameters of federal law and state law. And
which we did, you all did for the two dominium projects.
Yes, that's correct. And then after that process, we will route the appropriate documentation to the Metro Nashville Mayor's Office, and Mayor Connell did execute those certificates for dominium. So at this point, Dominium will use the executed TEFRA certificates and the other applicable documentation to apply to Tennessee Housing Development Agency for consideration for approval for the allocation of volume cap, the 4% low-income housing tax credits that they will need to further complete and resume their diligence for their project. It is anticipated that the first round approvals will be allocated in the first quarter, so late March, maybe early April, depending on THDA's schedule. And at that point, the finance working group will continue its diligence and work towards a closing. With the anticipated timeline, at least preliminarily, it is set to close sometime in late September, early October, both financings.
And with those, just because we talked about it, the two dominium new projects, this board approved the inducements in December.
Yes.
The TEFRA hearings have now taken place, but that still does not require the board to approve the final bond resolutions when they come to us. This board could make the decision, hey, for whatever reason, to vote no. So just because we approve the basic inducement does not set us on a path where we're required to approve the final bond resolution, correct?
That's correct. And the final bond resolution, as Chair Hodge stated, it would be the last step that the board will have to approve with this process, and that will come before the board after the successful award, if given, from THDA to Dominium. So that will be sometime in April or May. And with that final bond resolution, accompanying with there will also be substantially final bond documents. So that will include the trust indenture, the loan agreement, tax regulatory agreement, land use restriction agreement, other bond documents that the board will be a party to, that our firm review and sign off on as your bond counsel. And we will continue the process that way. So that is the diligence piece. Any comment before I move on to voting and approvals?
The only comment I would make is that we talk about housing, but the powers of the IDB are much broader. It's really the economic development arm for Metro government, and that's why it's a part of the economic development division of Metro. So hopefully going forward with all of the activities that are going on in Metro, you will start to see different types of projects that will come in, which will be very exciting. So this board could actually leave a strong legacy as it goes forward with the continued growth and development of Metro government. Because whenever you have these plans, you know, the next question is, well, how do we pay for it? And one of the ways that you can pay for it would be through the issuance of tax-exempt bonds, as was discussed, pilots, tax increment finance districts. All of these tools in the toolbox for Metro government is something that this board will have the ability to facilitate. And as your council, we will give you guidance along with economic development and legal. So this is a very unique structure where you've got tremendous guidance, you know, through these other entities of Metro government that will keep you focused, help you with the due diligence and vetting of all of these projects, be able to answer your questions so that you'll have some assurance as you go forward with your voting. And we're just happy to be a part of this because we're at a very exciting period right now.
And that's great. That's perfect segue. It goes to voting and approvals and then their relationship with the ECD office. You know, voting and approvals, that's why when we start any process through the inducement and thereon, I mean, if you have any questions, please reach out to our firm throughout the process. If it gets to a point in this process where it does get to a final bond resolution, we will hope that all questions have been answered by then before the board makes a final decision. But rest assured, just because the final bond resolution is approved, that authority still has a time frame within it as well, too. Within the policies and procedures, we implemented a 6-month period that after approval of the final bond resolution, the transaction is expected to close. If it does not close, then the applicant has to come back to the board and show cause why the authority for closing through the bond resolution, final bond resolution, should be extended an additional 6 months. So even if, for example, prime example, the last Tennessee State, University presentation, at that 6-month increment, the applicant just chose to withdraw rather than coming back to the board and asking for an additional 6 months because the structure for the financing in which it was originally approved changed substantially. It changed from a public offering to a private placement. The underwriter was changed throughout the whole process. So if the board, if the applicant wanted to come back, we told them that it would not be for an extension, it would be to start over the process because the project had changed. So instead of going through that process, they chose to withdraw, and then when they had everything ready, and they will come back for new consideration for the board for a new application. But for the board to know that you just don't vote on the final bond resolution and just wave your hands and say, good luck, we'll see you on the other side. That's not the case. So, and even when the board does that, we still do work with the working group, have weekly calls, conduct our diligence, exercise our authority as your bond counsel to make sure that this transaction is not only legally structured and sound for the IDB, but for the overall citizens of metropolitan government here in Davidson County.
Yeah, I have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one point of clarity for the public. Can you confirm that your guys' fees are paid by the applicant as opposed to the IDB and or the city?
That's true. That is correct, Director Hastings. Our fees are paid through the cost of issuance for the bond financings if they close. If they don't close, then that is just something that we will.
We still don't get a bill.
No, you will not get a bill.
But we got our application fee.
And we made sure you got that. Other than that, that is just par for the course. But no, we don't receive any fees from Metropolitan government for the IDB, nor for the IDB for our work. So.
And I want to say I forget the name of the form, but when the bonds do close, that form, I guess the disclosure form shows all the fees, all the fees we receive at closing, as well as your fee that you receive as well.
Two is the it's really one. So after closing the transaction, the issuer, the chair of the issuer, has to execute what's called a 8038. Form 8038, that is the form of the from the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, that sets forth all of the fees paid for the transaction, the the final par amount, the interest rate, the name of the issuer, things of that sort on that form. Excuse me. Within 45 days of the closing, it is another form that goes to the state, a form 0253 that goes to the state that lays out all of the fees associated with the transaction that were paid from the cost of issuance. So from the issuer to our firm to the bond counsel, borrowers counsel, all of the firm's fees are listed on that form, and that form is available to the public. Director Hastings, to that? Yes, okay. Perfect. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think that this might be a good time to just open it up to the members of the board to ask questions because, as I mentioned earlier, this is an exciting time. We're right on the verge. I don't want to cut you off if you have other statements. We want to be mindful of the
just
time,
one more
too.
point, but we can.
Well, go ahead and make that
My
point.
last point was, as the board continues to accumulate funds, one also huge thing we did with this new application was to add a closing fee for the IDB. And that closing and funds received from that closing fee should be used to further the mission and public purpose of the IDB. I know Chair Hodge mentioned, small business grant programs. That is definitely within the purview and authority of the IDB to do and discharge your duties as a board. Things that at previous meetings were mentioned with educational programs around home ownership, around financial literacy. The IDB can definitely work hand in hand with the ECD office and Metro government to do certain programs like that for the education and, betterment for the community. So I just wanted to make that last point before we hop into, the Q&A and everything. But, as my partner said, we're entering into, exciting times, and the IDB can be a huge component and a great asset to ECD and Metro as we go forward.
Thank you all for the presentation. And again, the board member Davis was on the board when the board went through the process and sent out RFP and interviewed several firms. And after we did that, and you all remember that day 3 years ago, it was overwhelmingly the board voted in support of you all, and I would say you all have definitely done what you said you would do. When we think about this past year and the revenue generation and the deals, we've never done, I've been on the board, I've shared this 10 years, we've never done this many bond deals in a year, and really great projects. When you think about Recovery Center, for patients dealing with addiction, to multiple housing projects, a student housing project, even though it didn't pan out at the time. So you all have done what you said you would do. So it's been great to work with you all. With that, I'll start here to my left. Any questions? Board Member Rodriguez, go ahead.
More of a comment. So one of the things that I've kind of noticed is that we're starting to build up the funds, right, and we're moving in a good direction, things that haven't happened in a while. One of the things is we know our purpose now and whatnot. We've kind of known it for a little bit from now.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part you said?
We've kind of known our purpose,
Okay.
And now I think maybe it's only been more reactionary as seeing things come forward. And I think Board Member Haston brought it up with maybe creating a TIF district. Long answer, no, right? But could we state our priorities based on a study of things that need to be developed in Nashville? Would that be something that we'd be interested, having goals of something we want to see in our city? Of course, making an educated decision on it, of course, and seeing if there's a study out there, working with MDHA, seeing on housing, where it could potentially be more needed and whatnot.
Yeah, I think those are all great points.
Look, if I could respond to that.
Yes, thank you.
One of the things that this board benefits of is being in partnership with Economic Development Department, because this board does not have the responsibility of creating these types of models, but to facilitate it. So a lot of the things as far as establishing a TIF district or pilots will come from the private sector, will come from different developers that will come to Metro with ECD and said, look, this is what I envision, this is how I plan to do it, what incentives or tools will be available to me in order to facilitate me doing this. And that's when ECD will do its evaluation and say, well, okay, we have an industrial development board that could help you issue tax-exempt bonds. We always talk about tax-exempt bonds, but you could issue taxable bonds as well. And there could be benefit there, as well as a pilot or a TIF district. So it would not be this board going out saying, okay, we're going to do a TIF district and then bring people in. It's the private developers that will come with the ideas and the concepts to Metro, and then ECD will say, okay, this is something that we believe could work, and these are the incentives or the tools that we have to assist in bringing this to fruition.
Understood. Got it. Terrific.
You have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, two questions. First question is to your point about tax exempt versus taxable, and just the different types of deal structures that we could vote on as a board. I think I asked this question maybe last year, but is there flexibility in how we maybe divide up our fee structures so that we incent some sort of development more so than others, or in this interest rate environment that's higher for longer? I mean, is there a way that we could look at the private market and say, oh, well, maybe if we reduce our fee structures by 5 bips, then at that point it's much easier for them to come to us as opposed to the private market?
Now, when you say you mean as far as the application fee, the board's
Are you
closing
talking
fee?
about are you referring to the closing fee?
Yeah, I mean, any of our
Okay.
fees, just looking at that.
Of course, that is up to the discretion of the board. We always just would advise uniformity to keep people from saying, hey, why this, developer or entity paying this versus we're paying this. It just kind of, you always want to err on the side of caution just to not, create that, precedent doing that. But of course, that is up to the discretion of the board. If the board does that, we would probably recommend to do a uniform change with the policies rather than a project by project, sort of thing. But that is up to the board to decide.
Go ahead. Before just a question on that. So thank you for bringing that up. So we talked about this last year. So obviously, listen, we can, if necessary, revisit our policies later. We've done it for a year. They've been in place for a year, this increased fee. So great question on that. So a question I would have for you all we've gotten several developers this past year. Was anyone concerned with the fee or the closing
No
costs?
one expressed anything to us.
Okay.
Yep. So nothing to us directly.
Sure. Now I was just curious because you all are the ones that are dealing with them.
Right.
Okay.
And actually, they've come back again.
That's true.
So, yeah.
Yeah. But great question. So continue. You have another question too.
Yeah, as more so just related, because I know you guys also represent IDBs or similar quasi-governmental entities across the state and other states probably, I don't know. Are there things that you see or deal with that you think we could be doing better to signal to the private market that, hey, we're open for business and we want to do the best deals for our city?
We think that will come through the ECD's office. It will be best to come through the mayoral administration. I know the Mayor Connell, he's focused on a lot of things, but transportation, housing, education seems to be, at the top of the list. And that's what the IDB is primed to do. But instead of individual board members going out, we would never recommend you guys go out and, solicit or, but we will always encourage that to come through the ECD office. And whatever other nonprofit kind of conferences or whatever like that, board members or the chair can go speak on various panels throughout the city and the state and say, hey, this is what our IDB is doing. And if you are interested in, coming to Metro with your ideas and business, you can reach out to, our ECD office, et cetera. We would probably be best to handle it like that. We really want the board to be hands-off and have a process that is free and clear of, any impropriety or a potential conflict. Because at the end of the transaction, we have to issue opinions. And as your bond counsel, and our opinion states plainly that everything was done validly and everything was authorized within its due course. So to keep everything and protect the IDB board members, protect the IDB as an entity, protect Metro Nashville, we just want to keep you all, above table, hands off from that, but refer all those inquiries and questions to the ECD office. But you're free to welcome to speak on any panels. I know you guys are a few of you are involved in different housing endeavors and things of that sort of educational and have your own expertise. So always feel free to let people know what board you sit on and what that board can do generally. But just always err on the side of caution not to attract, business intentionally to the IDB.
Yeah, and I just supplement that by saying from a developer standpoint, what you want is consistency. Yeah. You want a strong board that is able to work with ECD, evaluate their projects, move their projects along at a good pace, and just to facilitate what your mission is. So it's not about, trying to do anything to attract, because that's not your role, but your role is to facilitate. So once ECD or the mayor's office comes and says, look, this is a great project, they need financing, they need a TIF, they need a pilot, then have your structure in place to facilitate that efficiently and quickly to move the project forward and to facilitate it. So I think that's what will attract developers versus any sort of advertising or going out, as my partner says, trying to encourage people to come here. Just let them know that, we've reestablished ourselves, and it's a growing process. The more transactions that this board does, the more developers are going to start paying attention to you, and more are going to start inquiring about the tools in your toolbox.
Yep. And obviously you mentioned it, like with Dominion, for example, in December, though, that was the fourth project, third and fourth projects that they've brought before the board, separate projects. Obviously, they've done some additional, come to us for some additional bond issuance. But to your point, now we have a really great application. We have a clear process in place. So when people apply, it's like, hey, I know. Now, again, it's up to the board to vote how the board chooses, but at least the process of going through it. I mean, we have a great leadership team in place to work on that. So that reputation, speaks for itself. And I would say we'll continue to attract more developers to our board, even though, there's a fee, like you said, you haven't heard, there hasn't been a complaint from people up to this point. So thank you for that. Any other questions here? Board Member Wright, you have a question?
Yeah, well, actually my question was answered about the marketing, because I believe the redevelopment districts, the TIF, that is a huge tool, and a lot of the redevelopment districts are aspiring. And I don't think it's been a lot of TIF deals in a while. So I know on this board, in my decade of service, we've basically done three TIF deals. Well, I consider Oracle. Oracle is like a reverse TIF. I won't get into details on that, but that was kind of like a reverse TIF, I would say. But Madison Station, the Bellevue Mall redevelopment was a TIF deal as well. I think, we've done, I haven't heard too many of MDHA has done lately, but I just think that's a great tool. And like you mentioned, we don't need to do it at the board, but it can be done through marketing, just encourage developers to come here. But I want to commend the job you have done so far. I mean, it's been awesome, great. You have went beyond my expectations. So, I mean, it's like the chair mentioned, we've done 3 deals in 1 year, so that's great. We could continue that and improve. Oh, man, that's awesome. So hats off to you guys. You're doing a great job. Hope more success in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been our pleasure to work with this board, because sometimes, like we say, they grow and it's dynamic. And this part of the state is in such a unique position right now. They call it the IT City. We work with Metro government and other issuers of bonds here in Nashville. And it's really been a pleasure with the level of professionalism, the level of optimism, and the whole team working together. So this board is really strategically set up to be a vital part going forward of all of that. So the key is this was excellent training this morning with Josh and Sam, you know, and take that seriously because, you know, we think if the forecasting is accurate, you know, you guys will be rolling up your sleeves going to work because a lot of things will be happening that you'll be a part of. And the great thing about it, I know some of you have kids, it's great to ride around and say, yeah, our board financed that. You know, we were a part of that. And, you know, that's the sort of thing that we believe over the next few years you'll be able to do and be proud of.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for that training. Really appreciate it. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda, IDB Economic Development Overview with Jamari Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that intro, and I love hearing Director Brown. I don't hear that enough.
Yeah.
I was like, Josh said it. I was like, who's Director
I'm
Brown?
sorry. Senior Director Brown.
Oh, even better. So what I'm going to do here today is give you an overview of the ECD office, our strategy. As you just heard from the Carpenters, my job and Lily Beth's job is to go out and market the city, to bring the projects in. There's 3 checks and balances for all the partnerships that we enter into from the city. First one starts in the mayor's office. Before we even present it to you all, before we present it to the council, we do a lot of due diligence working with the company and trying to make sure that the project that we're presenting is going to be the best position for the city to prosper. And then we bring it to you all. And that's when it becomes an open public conversation. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, projects that are lasting multiple years of negotiation and working with the companies, especially when we're working with publicly traded companies. If something gets out, when we're currently recruiting a publicly traded company, they have to file SEC filings. And if they're not ready to do that, and it leaks from our office or our staff or anywhere from Nashville, we get cut from a project. And so while you may not be aware of all the marketing and activities that are going on, trust me, Lily Beth and I are busy, working very hard. So start off with a real quick overview of our office. We've got 4 people in our office. Hopefully we'll be able to continue to grow this office. We're chaired by our Chief of Development, Bob Mendez. Myself and Chris Coster operate as directors. Bob and Chris are really handling the day-to-day of all Metro development projects. So if Metro owns the property and we're developing it, those 2 are the ones that are kind of taking the lead in the forefront of any negotiation and work on that space. Lily Beth and I are the marketing people. We go out and say hi to everybody. We say yes to everything, and then we take it to Bob and Chris for them to tell us no and why we can't do it. So they would hate if I said that. But that's kind of how our office is shaped. And Bob is a direct report to the mayor, so pretty clear line of support in the mayor's office here. Moving on, just quick definitions of what economic and community development are. Historically, those were seen as separate opportunities. Economic development is really the driving energy behind growing jobs and investment in the community, whereas the community aspect was really about housing, workforce development. Moving forward, you really have to work hand in hand as a united front. If you spend all your time working on recruiting jobs, and you don't build a workforce, or you don't build housing to support the workforce, you can have jobs that no one can apply for and work for. If you just focus 100% on housing, you could build all the houses in the world, but people can't afford to move in or purchase those houses. So that's what I'm focused on, as creating that, as you see the seesaw, really trying to find a balance of leaning into community development, leaning into economic development, and both of those, if done well, create opportunity for Nashville. And I'm moving pretty fast because I know we like to try to get out usually at 1. We're probably going to be a little over 1. I said 2? No, we can go until 2, but I don't want to be the reason we're here at 2. And feel free to jump in with any questions. Again, those two pieces come together, and if done well, we create a lot of opportunity for Nashville. And as you've seen the success over the last few years, as the Carpenters mentioned, Nashville has become the it city. We've got a lot of interest, a lot of people coming, knocking on our doors, just from the work you all are doing in revenue bonds, obviously the need there. But then also we've got a lot of corporate partners. We got a lot of developers coming in, and private individuals, small businesses, the whole gamut. Opportunity leads to growth. Growth leads to investment. Investments leads to revenue. You've probably seen this slide before, but this is how Nashville gets its money. Majority of our revenue comes from the residential side. We also have a very large slice that comes from sales and use tax, and then everything else kind of falls in to make the whole budget. The two areas that Lilybeth and I are focused on growing are both the property side, whether that's commercial investment or residential investment, but then also the sales tax side, and that's where people are visiting for tourism, people are spending money and construction, whatever it is, we want to make sure that they're investing here locally. Our partners include the community, government, utilities, education, and industry. When I talk about government, the Industrial Development Board is one of those arms of the government that we work with when we're going out and trying to push the message for economic development. So, again, I'm moving pretty fast. What's next? Oprah Winfrey said, doing the best at this moment puts you in the best place for the next moment. So what is next for Nashville? It is setting this moment up correctly so that in the future we continue to grow reasonably. Obviously, the transit referendum is a huge moment for Nashville, a huge step in time for us doing what's best for right now. We also have to continue to keep doing what's best for right now so that we're preparing for the future. So as we talk about the future, you all may or may not be familiar with, I know board member Channel is very familiar with Prosper Nashville. This is a study that was undertaken 2 economic development directors ago under former economic development director Courtney Pogue, and setting up a economic development strategy study for the city of Nashville. With the goal, kind of having an equity lens and making sure that all of Nashville prospers with the growth, and it's not just the downtown core. So, with that being said, Prosper Nashville has 4 key focus areas. The first one being talent and workforce development, second one being economic competitiveness, third one being small and minority business, and fourth is the ecosystem and our partners and how we work together. Moving on, those 4 break down into 6 pillars that the studies focus on, and the final report is not out yet. This is an early look at some of the key pieces of the report that are kind of the building blocks for what we're working on. Number 1 is establishing an equity-centered vision for the city, strengthening Nashville's workforce. Number 3 is increasing support for Nashville small businesses. 4, increasing support for innovation. Number 5, enhancing opportunities for corporate partnership. And number 6, promoting economic competitiveness for our target industries. I've already mentioned our target industries in the past, what we're focused on. And those are also being used as you all are considering your small business grant as a lean in there. Moving on, just a few key pieces. And again, I don't want to spend too much time. There's a lot of words up there. But these are some of the things that we're going to be focused on under these 6 pillars, and I'll be glad to share it with everybody if you're interested in getting this presentation. Again, focusing on an equity-centered vision, strengthening our workforce, Nashville small businesses, the entrepreneurship ecosystem. I'll spend a quick moment here. You all may or may not have heard of the Innovation Alliance. This is a partnership between that's chaired by the mayor and the chancellor of Vanderbilt. The intent is to continue to grow and bring in other education institutions along with other partners. Launch Tennessee is a huge partner of the Innovation Alliance, along with others. The Nashville Entrepreneurship Center and others are huge partners that are leaning into this development and really trying to help Nashville think innovative on its next chapter, whether that's how do we innovate in transit, which as you've seen some of the things that we're doing there, how do we innovate in our permits process, how do we innovate in encouraging small businesses. The entire gamut is being looked at as far as if there's a thing that we want to do, let's put on a new vision for how we do that, not just use the try and old method. Number 5, looking at corporate partnerships. Again, we talked about the Innovation Alliance and the partnerships there, but also looking more at what P3 opportunities, public-private partnerships, can we lean in on to try to push Nashville forward and get some of the things that we want. We know Nashville cannot afford to do this alone, housing being one of those key areas. And workforce development is another key area where we know Nashville is not going to be able to just write a check and put everybody through school that we want to put everybody through school for opportunities that are coming. So looking for that corporate partnership to lean in and help weigh in on what they're looking for as far as employees, but then also leaning in on the corporate side. You see some of that with the Titans One community. Amazon does a lot of work in this space. Alliance Bernstein, Phillips, a lot of companies are already doing this, but we want to be intentional instead of having a kind of hodgepodge and everybody having their own little pie. Let's all sit down at the table and say, okay, you're tackling this, you tackle this, so that we can kind of work in the same group, same alignment. Lastly, talking about our target industries, and I'm going to jump into those here. Give you a little bit more background on how I came to the target industries for Nashville. What you see here are Nashville's major employment categories. A lot of words, very small. If you're sitting in the back of the room, you probably can't see it. But what I'll point out are the red areas. Red areas are things are in decline. The first section is looking exclusively at Davidson County. Second section is looking at our MSA. Third section is looking at the state. And then the fourth section is looking at the U.S. So if you have an area that is red across all four of those, that means that's probably not a target industry we want to focus in, because it's not only declining in Nashville, it's not only declining in our MSA, it's not only declining in our state, it's also declining on the U.S. level. So is that an area we want to put a lot of focus and try to grow? Probably not. The ones you see at the top are the key areas that are bolded, are areas that are promising for Nashville that we really want to focus in on. I'll explain just for the crowd. Everybody familiar with LQ or location quotient? Okay, I don't see anybody shaking no. Anybody? No? Okay. So quickly, location quotient is the concentration of an industry as compared to the national average. One means you have just as much industry as just about the average across the U.S. Anything above one means you have a higher concentration. If you have a higher concentration, that means you have probably more workforce, more opportunities, more investment happening there, which creates a unique story that you can tell to those other industry partners to say, hey, you're in this industry, we're killing it here, you should invest in here so that it lowers your cost of investing. One that I'll point out, which shouldn't be a surprise to everyone, is the music business. We're 3 times more concentrated than anywhere else in the U.S., so we are truly Music City, and not just for the music aspect, but actually the business behind it. So moving on, I've created this nice little chart. You've seen this chart, this quadrant before. Top left means it's promising. Bottom right means it is an area you want to stay away from because it does not show promise for us. The 2 areas that is being graded upon is average wage and growth over the next 10 years. Top right, we have some that are bolded. There are 6 industries up there that are bolded. Those are our target industries. We've got some that are underlined and some that are italicized. And I'll explain why we have those highlighted there on this slide. I talked about our target industries before. Those are the 6 that you've seen historically: the music business, financial services, healthcare, medical diagnostics, corporate business services, and construction. What you don't see there, but is heavily throughout our target industries, is information technology as a standalone. It is because each one of these industries has a component that is specialized for them in information technology. And we want to make sure that the talent we're trying to recruit, the talent we're trying to train, and the companies we're trying to bring in align with those industries and not just general IT, because we want to, again, focus on the industries that we have a strong selling case for so that we're able to accelerate and reduce their costs, makes it an easier sell for us. We also have our support industries. These are industries that we just want to be mindful of and supportive of. When you look at hospitality tourism, no surprise, Nashville and its tourist base. Education, which includes MNPS, but also post-secondary. We have about 20 colleges and universities in the MSA, very large workforce supporting those institutions. We want to be mindful of supporting those and making sure that they have a place to live, that there are also opportunities for people that want to go into those industries. They're getting the training that they need, and those institutions can find and hire what the talent that they need in order to continue to serve. And lastly, public administration. That is just general government. Obviously, we are the state headquarters here in Nashville, but we also have a consolidated government. We also have a lot of federal operations here in town. Represents a very, very large workforce. I think somewhere around 20,000, if remember from the previous slide. Don't quote me on that. Look at the numbers. But that is also a very large workforce. We don't have to do much there because they're headquartered here, but we want to be mindful as things are happening in the public administration sector, because these are individuals that are buying homes, buying cars, going to the grocery store. Those two areas that we're really focused on raising revenue, that the property tax and sales tax, these are individuals that are contributing to that as well. And then lastly, we have two emerging industries. These are industries that don't quite hit the high level for us as far as a lot of concentration, but we're starting to build some energy behind that. They offer great paying jobs, and we actually do have some level of concentration here, but we want to be mindful. And if we get an opportunity, we'll lean in, but it's not one that we're going to put a big billboard on and say, hey, we want this. And those are biopharma and research and development. Moving on, I've talked about career pathways a little bit with all of those industries. One of the things that we're working on, myself and Lily Beth, is we've identified the top 15 careers of demand for our target industries. And with that, we're going to be creating career pathways for those. And that starts in the high school all the way up to your post-secondary doctoral level. And the way I view this, and the reason why you see an interstate up there, is a career pathway should be an interstate. You shouldn't just start at one point and go to the end. There's other reasons why you need to make a career shift. If your industry that you're in is dying in the marketplace, you got to pivot. You can't go all the way back to high school and start over. Where's your on-ramp to get to that next position to make sure that you're continuing to make that living wage? So that's what we're working on, to put that into a visual format. We've developed, this is one of the ones that we've already developed, is the nursing career pathway. As you see here, starting in high school, you can start in the nursing career pathway and work your way all the way up to a very, very nice high-paying job over here at the $200K per year level. And the numbers down there that you see on the demand, that's an annual demand over the next 10 years. So every year for the next 10 years, these are the demand numbers. So for the high school one, we've got roughly 1,500 positions every year we're going to need to fill, moving all the way through that pipeline. And in high school, you can go one of two ways. You can go straight to the four-year school, or you can start to an associate's degree. Your current financial situation, your demographic situation will dictate which one makes the most sense for you at the time, but there is a path for you to go through that process and come out to a very, very nice paying wage, very livable wage here in Nashville in about 4 years. So those are the career pathways that we're going to be doing. I think we've got about 60 or so that we're going to be developing, Lily Beth and I, and hopefully some more support coming in along with the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce and our education partners and industry partners as well. So again, our office is charged with growing and creating the opportunity. How do we do this? You've heard a little bit about some of this toolkit already from the Carpenters as well as Josh and his team for Metro Legal. Starting off with our fast-growing business incentive. This is our small business incentive that the city has that works its way in partnership with IDB. We get funded through the budget process, and when we find applicable companies, we work with them, put the application together, and then we present that to the IDB for approval and funding. The last time we've had a project come through in this under this incentive was Jump Crew back in 2017, and they've now grown past what we consider a small business opportunity. Our next one is our property investment incentive. This is a tool that helps small business owners invest in the property that they're either leasing or own so that they can upgrade that exterior to attract more foot traffic there. The last project we worked on for this program, and this one is approved exclusively in the Office of ECD, same funding mechanism. Once it's approved by Metro Council, we then have the ability to tap into that funding and award that. And Lily Beth has created a pretty long Rolodex of companies right now that she's talking to. What's the number? So we're busy trying to grow here. And the last one we were able to tap into was Crema Coffee on Duke Street, their Duke Street location in 2019. Moving on to our big jobs grant.
Jamar, real quick. On the fast the one right before this one. What's been the challenge on this one?
So, as you see up there, there are some, and both of these programs have challenges. Both of our small business programs have challenges, and we're currently looking at ways to improve access to these programs. The small business one, the challenge that we have now, when the program was first drafted, there was a wage requirement, 80% of the MSA's average occupational wage. As you can see right now, back when it was created, I think that number ended up at $36,000. As you can see right now, it's $55,000 and some change. That's a pretty high threshold in order for a small business to create 10 of those jobs in order to start that qualification process. And the award is $500 per job. So you add $550,000 to your payroll for a $5,000 grant. Not a lot of motivation there to go through that process. We are aware of that, and we're studying ways to improve there. The second one on the property investment one, first qualifier is you have to fall within one of those pink zones based on economic data that was set up when the project or the program was formed. The second qualifier is the parcel has to be valued at less than $1 million at application. And Lilybeth has been able to, again, find 8 of those companies that meet both of those criteria. Our challenge right now for this program, one is the property value. As you all know, property values in Nashville have skyrocketed. And so if you find commercial property valued at less than $1 million, it's probably going to need a lot of work, or you have a very small parcel. The other challenge is that we're limited to external construction only. So if you're doing internal work, we can't help you there. And so we've run into a little bit of a roadblock on both of those areas, and things that we are aware of and currently studying to try to make changes.
Point of clarification, is that you said the property, like the whole parcel, or if it says, say it's a strip center, can you just do the facade of the one itty bitty space within that strip center?
Yes, correct. So if it is a leased space, you can use the percentage of the total square footage of the space as your value that has to come in under $1 million, which we've been able to identify several of those. But when you're just looking at the exterior of a strip space and all you have is a door and a couple of windows, our minimum threshold is $10,000. You got to put in a very nice door to hit that minimum threshold for that company. Moving on to our jobs grant. These are our large grants. You all have seen Alliance Bernstein, Phillips, I think Warner has come through here over the last few years that have come through. Bridgestone come through and do these grants every year with you also. Not news for you. Our conversations start at 500 jobs. And we again do due diligence to see if the company is worth us partnering, and then we present that to you all. Our next one is payment in lieu of taxes. Pilots, again, as the Carpenters mentioned, we're the marketing force, we're the face, and we start these conversations with the companies and investors and determine whether those make sense as appropriate programs for us to partner with. Historically, our pilot program for economic development reasons, which would be brought before the IDB, we haven't tapped into that a lot. And there's a reason for that. Once it's already on the tax rolls, we try not to take it off because that is revenue again. As you saw how large of a percentage our property taxes are, if we start eating away at that, we start to got to figure out how do we make up for that difference somewhere else. And so we are very mindful of if it is already a building there and it's already operational, we probably aren't going to entertain a pilot to try to help offset those costs. If it is a greenfield, that is where we'll start to have those conversations and understand exactly what that project looks like and throw it through some metrics to see whether we want to partner or not. Moving on, revenue bonds. Won't bore you with that. I think you all have just had an hour-long presentation on revenue bonds. Then we also have our foreign trade zone. This is something that over the last few months, obviously you're following some federal news. This is getting a lot of traction right now for Nashville. I think I have 7 companies that are waiting for us to kind of finalize some internal documentation in order for them to enter into the foreign trade zone. What a foreign trade zone does is it allows them to bring in external material or equipment or whatever into a zone where they're not having to pay tariffs or duties on that. And then once it leaves, depending on its next destination, they may or may not have to pay tariffs or duties. There's also a production component of that. So they can bring in raw materials, create something. The example I usually use is think of a bicycle. Bicycle has a bunch of parts to it. rubber is taxed at this number, steel is taxed at this number, but a bicycle is taxed at this number. And so we bring in all the raw materials. We don't have to pay the taxes on those pieces, but we only pay the taxes on the finished good, which is the bicycle. And so if we've got 50, 50, 50 on all these different individual components, but the bicycle is only taxed at 10, that saves the company a lot of money and draws them as an interest to invest in the local community. This is the end of my presentation, and I'll open up for questions. If you build it, they will come. It's always my philosophy in economic development. So I'll open it up for questions, and sorry for rushing, trying to keep you guys on a tight timeline.
Thank you. Start here to my left. Any questions?
Yes,
Board Member
may I-
Rodriguez, go ahead.
Yeah, may I get the slides as well,
Yeah,
please?
yeah, you got to.
All right, here to my right, Board Member Davis.
I appreciate the presentation and love the slides as well. Dig in a little deeper, and yeah, thanks for the time consideration as well. So I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Board Member Wright.
Good job.
Yes, also great job. I was wondering if you could go back to the slide that had the different LQs. Wow, I just lost my train of thought. So when you're looking at new prospective transactions, you're looking at, you want to attract them if they're above a 1, or what's your threshold that you're looking at?
So the location quotients were used to help identify our target industries, and all of those are above 1, which means we have a strong concentration. Yeah. You never want to start, and the ones that are the emerging are below 1. Yeah. You never want to start a target industry below 1, because you have to put a lot of infrastructure in place for that. So you have to create training programs. Usually if you're above 1, local universities, community colleges are already creating or already have training programs that align with the industry already. So I don't have to create that new. So I don't have to spend money or time kind of restarting that. You also have, usually you'll have real estate in the market that supports that industry as well. So those two things are really key to kind of a company coming in. If they have to build from scratch and they also have to build a workforce from scratch, speed to market comes into play. And if it takes them 3 years to ramp up here and it takes them 2 years to ramp up in another community, they're probably going to go to the other community.
Got it. And relating to this and how you're talking about new client or new prospective transactions, like at what point are you starting to talk about housing in that process, or are you?
No, absolutely. So that comes into the workforce piece, and a lot of companies, believe it or not, are asking, okay, where are my workers going to live? And so it always depends upon the wage that they're paying. One of the things that we're really mindful of is making sure that the wages we're looking to recruit in are going to be living wages for Nashville, and that means that you can afford an apartment and a car without having a roommate for us, which is about $76.80 roughly, are the wages that we're really trying to target for Nashville and our incentive programs.
Gotcha. So then you had that $55,000 number. So that doesn't fit in within that.
No, so that is exclusively for our small business program. So that's a little bit different than our large business program. No.
Got it. And then when you're looking at these, all the ones that you mentioned, I think there were like 3 or 4 NAICS codes that were, less than 1 and were declining, or as you're looking to attract or look at new jobs coming in. What part of that conversation is retraining that workforce? Obviously, the Pathways program and catching someone young out of high school is incredible, but if we're looking at these industries that we have, as well as the ones that we're hoping to bolster, how much of that is retraining our existing workforce?
So as you look at this, one that's showing up a little higher than it currently is. When I ran this at the beginning of last year. When I run this again, it'll more than likely reflect that, is the food manufacturing space. Since I ran this last year, we had 3 very large food manufacturers close doors in Davidson County. So obviously that's a huge impact. When you look at that, we've got baking, we've got measurement of goods and things like that. One of our emerging technologies, emerging industries is biopharma, right? So I've been measuring ingredients for this cake. Why can't I measure ingredients for this drug being developed? What level of skill? I know how to read a measuring stick, how fine-tuned do I need to be in order to transition? And there's several programs that I believe Nashville State has, and Vanderbilt and Belmont are both working on to do some up-training in that space.
Beautiful. So you expect there to be easy transitions to...
No transition's easy, but I do expect that we'll have programs in place to help support those individuals that need to make that transition. Yeah.
I may have more questions, but I think that's it for now.
Yeah.
So.
Director Brown,
Yes.
what can we do as a body to support your office, which ultimately supports you? And I say that in the context we were talking earlier about going to council with support for the state legislation that changed on the housing piece. And there's a lot on your desk,
Yeah.
as I know well, and as you know well. So what can we do to further support your office and support you?
When I bring a project, just say yes and don't ask questions.
Well, you know I'm not going to do that.
No, I'm saying that jokingly. I think continue to focus in on the mission of an industrial development board, which you heard from Josh earlier, and you heard the carpenters talk about, like really focus in on your job as being that connector and that convener and that kind of approver of the work that we're doing. And so when we do bring things, make sure that the questions you're asking are germane to the topic and the focus of what we're bringing to you, so that when a company comes, if a company comes and this becomes a grading process for them where they're raked over the coals, they're like, okay, I saw such and such come before this board and they didn't have a good time. I'm not even going to entertain the city of Nashville. So those are things like, and definitely ask the questions, but just make sure that they're on topic for what the project is and not moving outside the scope. That'll be my recommendation to you.
Thank you, Director Brown. So I'll just add some comments for us as a body. I know we've talked about it before. I think we've been working for like a year and a half now on our ad hoc committee to make sure that we as a body are focusing on the city's priorities, that we as a body are supportive of whoever the mayor is and whoever sits in the seat that Jamari sits in. I wasn't at the ad hoc committee this morning's meeting. I was ill. But I just want to make sure that we as a body continue to recognize that we have a lot of authority outside housing. I think I said that about a year and a half ago when we first started the ad hoc committee process and the strategic planning. And I think we really need to heavily lean in on what we can do to be real supportive of Davidson County. At the end of the day, Davidson County was called the IT city before I moved here, and I've been here 11 years. And so when we start looking at some of the numbers, I think we are critical to helping Davidson County meet the needs of Nashville residents, Davidson County residents, Nashville Davidson County businesses, so that they aren't being priced out and moved out, and we can further support that. So thank you, Josh, at our last meeting in asking Jamari, can we make sure we continue our ad hoc meetings so we can move that process along, and that we as a body, again, can be truly a part of what's supposed to make Nashville the IT city, also in light of what the carpenters were saying. You know, this is the right time, but I think it's been the right time for a long time ago. And now I'm shutting up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right.
Thank you, Director Brown. I'm going to keep saying
Appreciate
Director
that.
Brown.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, last item on the agenda, Chairman's report. So I'll be brief, but thought it was important to take a look back at this past year and all the all the accomplishments we've made, and think about also as we look forward to a great 2025. I think this will be an even better year. So again, I'll be brief. Feel free to ask questions. But I thought about this quote. You can see it about greatness, because at all of our board meetings, the conversations we have, it all comes down to our board wanting to be great, wanting to make a great impact on the city and the residents. I truly believe we have a fantastic group of people, not only in the leadership team with Metro and the Carpenters, but certainly most importantly as board members. So thank you. We talked about IDB function already, but this is a map I put together because I think it's really neat when you think about this past year, all the different projects that we've done, but also from a geographic perspective, all over the city. We've obviously talked about the Dominion projects. 2 came before us in December on Trinity and Buena Vista, East Nashville, right off Dickerson, Cleveland Park, Cumberland Housing way over here in West Nashville. We talked about the cash incentive grants, large business with Alliance Bernstein and Phillips. Those are obviously located downtown. And then we did, we haven't talked a lot about this today, but we've also approved, as passed through some state grants as well for August Bio Services, for example, which is in the Donaldson area. So this really illustrates, which I'm really excited about, to see the impact that this board is having, the positive impact we're having all over the city. Although this project was not one that this board approved, I thought it was really important to discuss, and I know some of you, I saw Board Member Chandler there, Board Member Haston as well. I was privileged enough to be on the board. This was, again, the last pilot that this board in Metro approved was for the Ernest Rip Patton Transit Center. And what I really like about the work that we do, and this, I want to share this, the decisions that you make today, you might not see it immediately today, but they're long-term and have a long-term impact down the line. And I know over the last couple of years, it's been great driving by to see the construction, but I know you were, like I said, I know some of us were there. That was a fantastic celebration several months ago. So really excited about that project. When you look at it, because our board is economic development impact jobs, right? So when I look at that $16.9 million development, awesome. All the people, the work there currently, all the folks that did construction, that goes in hand with what this board does. But then this is the part that I was reading about, was more than 100,000 jobs are now accessible within a 45-minute public transit commute because of the Ernest Rip Patton Transit Center. So folks before, and we've talked about this area, the census tract has one of the lowest auto ownership rates. So when you talk about economic development, it all goes hand in hand: jobs, housing, transportation. And this was something that this board did. So I want to share that. And I won't read the entire quote, but
hey,
this
Nigel,
yes.
Quick question. I've been wondering this. Did we put the 41% DBE target on Rip Patton, or did council add that?
I think that was part of the pilot already with council. To my knowledge.
Did council later on put it in there?
No, I think that was already in there. I think, to my recollection, but I have to check because I want to say that was approved in 2020. Jamari, could you check on that? Okay, thank you. Great question. But you can see the quote here about the impact that project has made. And again, we're talking about jobs and transportation. If you can't have reliable transportation, or it takes you forever to get to work, really defeating the purpose. So really great project. We talked about Cumberland Housing Recovery Center. Again, this was a project in West Nashville for those dealing with addiction. I won't read all of this to you, but just some background. Cumberland Heights has treated over 93,000 folks. And the facility that we approved last year is for a new dormitory, 40 beds. And I thought this quote, the second part, was something that struck me. When we often think about patients, and that sounds so clinical. We do call them patients, but our patients are somebody's family members. They're our fathers, our mothers, our sisters, our brothers, our children. So they deserve a living space that provides them dignity and respect and creates really the container where recovery can take root on this campus. So, again, these are impactful projects that this board is doing. So, really excited about that one. I won't. If you recall, also when they came before us, Cumberland Housing talked to us about coming before us for phase 2 as well. So keep that in mind. So again, we're doing great work. We're establishing ourselves with great partners and developers, and people see that, and they're coming back to us again for repeated business. Talked about this. I picked this picture because I saw Mark, board member Wright, squeezed himself into this picture. We don't spend a lot of time on this because we've talked about this a lot, but obviously 900 Cleveland Park is a project that initially came to this board several years ago. Dominium, they've turned out to be really great partners with this board. And I had the opportunity to speak at this celebration several months ago. Board member Haston was there, board member Wright. Really amazing project. And again, it goes hand in hand with what we talk about, affordable housing, but also located on a major corridor, right, with transit. So everything goes hand in hand. 256 units for this development. So really exciting project. Then when we look at Dominium in totality, the projects that came before us last year, 256 units for 900 Cleveland Park, which would you say is pretty good development, you all, would you say? I think I asked, could I rent the terrace out at some point, but really quality housing. And then with the other two projects on Buena Vista and Trinity that this board approved the inducement resolution for back in December, last year, just with Dominium alone, that's 704 affordable housing units that this board has been involved in, which is phenomenal. And one of the things about Dominium, too, when you think about it, we need housing on all ends. We need 1 bedrooms. We need 2 and 3 bedrooms. And so it's exciting to see, too, with their Buena Vista and Trinity developments, there'll be more 2+ bedroom units as well. And then lastly, because I said I would be brief, just want to share this with you. So that's the impact. That's the impact this board has made. I showed it to you. So if you don't realize what you do matters, I hope that point came across today in the types of projects this board has approved over the past year. Then this is just icing on the cake. So when you go back to year one is 2023, we had $75,000. At the end of last year, we've doubled that to $150,000. Through our fees, through application fees and closing fees. And again, people are paying and coming back to us again. Just in last year alone, we generated $25,000 in application fees alone. This year, and this does not take into account any new projects, but if the 2 Dominium projects that came before us in December come back before this board this year, and if this board approves them, which this board is not required to do, but if this board did, we're going to even more than double our revenue again this year. And that doesn't even account for any new projects. So when you hear me talk about the small business grants and things like that we can do, or you hear Jamari talk about the small business grant that Metro has, and the challenge with the requirements, I can tell you, being on this board several years ago, this board was very supportive of those small business employee grants as well as the blighted property grant. But now there's some challenges with the criteria, which that's why it's exciting for us, because we don't have to stand next to that criteria. We can develop our own small business grant funding to fill in that gap. And what's great is we're doing it with money that we've generated by doing great projects anyway. So really excited. I'll stop there, but just know that this year is going to be even more exciting. We expect even more great projects. We expect to continue to have some great speakers coming to the board as well. And again, any questions or comments? I'll stop. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time. It is. Let's see here.
Got a question.
Oh, who has a question? Go ahead. I was about to adjourn, so go ahead.
Just on the last slide, just a point of clarification, the $150,000 that we've got in the bank,
where do we house our money?
So our money is, so great question. So our money is housed with Metro and Metro's general fund. So we have our bucket, but it allows us to gain higher interest rate because it's pulled together.
That's where I was going. I was
Yep.
making sure it was an interest-bearing account. So even if we do nothing, which I hope we don't do, but even if we do nothing, it's still growing.
Yes, and also just to point out that projection is based on the Dominion deals closing this year.
Well, the 150 we have. Right?
That's correct.
The
That's
350 we don't have yet.
That's right. Projection. Exactly. All right. Well, again, thank you very much for your time. It is here, let's see, right at 12:30. Is that right? All right. With there being no further business, again, I want to thank our guests. I want to thank Metro Finance, Metro Legal, Metro ECD, the Carpenter firm. And most importantly, I want to thank you, your board members, for sacrificing your time and serving on this board. With there being, and Metro IT as well. Thank you. With there being no further business, we will adjourn here at 12:30. Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.